Hi guys, I publish many novels in our Telegram. Each novel has its own exclusive Telegram channel packed with all chapters in high-quality audio. Plus, if the novel is ongoing, you'll get all future updates and releases automatically, no extra cost, no monthly payment. Just make a one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi and enjoy unlimited access forever. Don't miss out on the ultimate audiobook experience. Links in the description. If you can't support me financially, just like and subscribe our videos. Thank you guys, your support means a lot. And as always, enjoy Shadow. Chapter 604, Stripped 2. Everything was going as planned. Jackal had foreseen everything. He acted in accordance with what he had seen. His confidence stemmed from his vision. And yet, how is this possible? He took a step back, staring at Julian, who was still standing. In his hand was an unassuming black sword while his head was lowered. His entire body was drenched in blood pooling beneath him. In his current state, he should be dead. From the blood loss to the sword that had pierced his body, there was simply no way for him to remain standing. And yet, this doesn't make sense. What sort of trickery is this? A thought crossed his mind as he looked at Julian. It all started to make sense then. Necromancy? Indeed, Julian was a curse user. It wouldn't be strange for him to know necromancy. Perhaps the only reason he was still standing was because of some sort of necromancer-related power he had placed on himself. So that's how it is. Although Jackal wasn't sure, he didn't feel like Julian was still a threat. To him, it was over. Struggling even in death. How pathetic. Shaking his head, he took a step forward, his sword raised as he got ready to end things. He was just about to slash down when Julian raised his head, his eyes hollow. Staring into his eyes, Jackal felt his back drenched with cold sweat. There was something about his gaze that left him completely unsettled. And as if that wasn't enough, he soon moved. What? Jackal's entire expression shifted, especially when he saw Julian raise his sword and slash down in his direction. Swoosh. It wasn't anything impressive, just a single slash. And yet, it almost seemed to follow his movements, tracing down like a snake ready to bite. Even then, Jackal managed to avoid the strike without much of a problem. He was just about to retaliate when Julian's second strike came. Swoosh. This time, it was faster, more precise, and more ruthless. Jackal barely had any time to process the strike before it was already on him. Clank. Sparks flew in the air as Jackal managed to block the attack. But the third one came. It was even faster than the previous one. Jackal wasn't able to react in time. All he could do was stare at the approaching sword with his own shock as he just barely managed to get the body of his sword to block it. Bang! For the first time, he was pushed back. How is this possible? Jackal's shock intensified when he saw Julian approach him. He seemed to be in some sort of trance, tracing some sort of path. Jackal's face twisted when he saw this. At the rate things were going, he was going to lose. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a brief moment. His thoughts quickly calmed down, and when he opened his eyes again, several different Julians appeared in front of him, all attacking him from several directions. The world seemed to slow down in that moment. He could see all the possible paths that Julian could take to attack him and acted accordingly, lowering his body as he pushed his foot forward to counterattack. This was his trump card. This was the reason why he had never treated Julian as a threat. Their tiers didn't differ by too much, with Julian being slightly behind. His emotive magic was also vastly superior, scary to some extent. But to Jackal, it was nothing. He could see it all. Whatever Julian planned, the moment he activated his ability, he could see it all. And since he could see it all, there was simply no way for Julian to win. Or at least, that was how it was supposed to be. Sheeing. A shattering sound manifested within Jackal's mind as he witnessed the 7 figures ahead of him shatter all at once, a single sword tracing down from an angle the images hadn't covered. Jackal's eyes widened at the sight, his expression quickly shifting as he scrambled to readjust his posture and block the attack. But how could he? As if the sword knew exactly where he was going to move, it altered in the air, crashing down against him from above. Clank. Sparks flew yet again as Jackal was sent scrambling back, his steps shattering the wooden floor beneath as blood seeped out from his mouth. Hyuk. Holding onto his chest, he felt a burning sensation running through his body as he tried his best to recompose himself. But that proved to be an impossible task as Julian appeared before him again, his entire presence seeming massive as he raised his sword up. Ah! Jackal screamed, his vision shattering once again as the sword came cleaving down from above. Bang! His body was sent reeling back again, his back crashing against the nearby wall as more blood flowed out of his mouth. Thump! Falling face down, Jackal let go of his sword as it clattered on the floor. His expression grew pale as he saw Julian move towards him again. No! He rushed to grab his sword, but by then it was already too late. Julian was already upon him. Jackal's eyes widened in that moment as he activated his skill. That was when he saw it. Darkness. That was all he saw. And in that moment, it became clear to him. I'm going to die. New. He screamed in terror as Julian's sword came cleaving down on him, his eyes turning bloodshot and the mana inside of his body building up to form a shield. The sword soon reached the shield and then it stopped. Silence. Ha! As Jackal's heavy breathing echoed in the air, he stared at Julian, who had suddenly stopped, his entire body frozen in motion. What? Startled, Jackal hurriedly moved away while coughing several times as blood poured down from his mouth. Quickly reaching for his sword, he pointed at Julian, but even then he got no reaction. As if frozen in time, Julian had stopped moving completely. And that was when it finally dawned on Jackal. Dead. Julian was dead. His face was drained of all color and his chest was no longer moving. He also didn't feel a single heartbeat. He's dead. Mumbling the same words again, Jackal's lips quivered before he suddenly burst out laughing. I knew it. Ha ha. His laugh boomed throughout the surroundings as he moved towards Julian. There was no way he could have survived that. He had been certain the first time. How could someone survive a stab in the body? Even if he had some sort of skill that allowed him to live for a little longer, there was simply no way for him to remain standing like that. It's impossible. And he was proven right. Jackal didn't waste a single second. Moving behind Julian, he stabbed his sword into his back, piercing his heart directly. Spurt. Blood splattered all over the walls as Julian's body limply fell forward. Thump. Ha ha. Jackal burst out laughing again, his face twisting as he bent over and ripped Julian's shirt apart, displaying the wounds he had placed over him. Placing his hand over Julian's back, his face grew maniacal. It's time I finally take what belongs to me back. A powerful glow suddenly erupted as the blood in Julian's body squirmed before slowly moving and assimilating into Jackal. Ha! Jackal's chest trembled as he felt the blood slowly moving from Julian's body to his. The wounds that he had sustained from Julian's last-ditch attack started to heal rapidly while his vision grew hazy. He felt a strange yet familiar power start to settle into his mind as his vision started to become clearer and clearer. In that moment, the world around him suddenly started to open up. Jackal felt like he could see and predict everything, foreign images flashing in his mind as the blood continued to seep into his body, slowly accumulating. His head raised as his face twisted in euphoria. Right then and there, he finally started to feel complete. He finally started to feel like Oraclus. HAA. As a turbid air escaped from his lips, Jackal removed his hand from Julian's body. His expression, which had previously been twisted, calmed down as he looked towards his surroundings. Everything, it feels so different. He couldn't quite explain the sensation he was feeling, but he felt a lot more clearer-headed. But still. Lowering his head and staring at his hands, Jackal's brows furrowed as he noticed strange blue veins covering his entire hands. He felt a strange sense of rejection coming from the blood he had just assimilated. But he wasn't too worried. Give or take a couple of years. Jackal understood that he had yet to fully merge with the blood. It would still take some time for him to do so, and in that time he planned on going back to the church and slowly absorbing everything. By the time he did, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The Church of Oracleus will be the only church left. Slowly lifting his head and looking at his surroundings, Jackal took a step forward and his body disappeared. At the same time his body disappeared, so did the bodies of all that had been present. All besides Julian, as he remained on the floor, his body completely lifeless. Gradually, the surroundings started to repair themselves, and it wasn't long before everything was restored to how it was once before. The barrier covering the surroundings shattered and a strange silence filled the surroundings. A silence that was soon shattered by the single sound of a knock. To talk. Julian. It was Leon. He had come to visit Julian in order to pick up some of the stuff he had left before. He had expected Julian to answer immediately but received no answer. Julian. Leon frowned, his brows furrowing. I know that you're in there. The innkeeper told me that you just came in. I also have your keys. To talk. Leon knocked again. However, even as he knocked again, he received no response. Growing irritated, Leon placed the keys in the lock and unlocked the door. I'm coming. Click. The door opened and Leon entered. It was as he was about to open his mouth that he finally saw Julian sprawled on the ground with not a single breath in him. Julian. His expression changed drastically. Hey, wake up. Julian. Leon tried to wake him up, but there was no denying the scene in front of him. Julian. He was truly dead. Chapter 605, 1. Julian. Leon's expression changed the moment he realized that something was amiss. However, it was only when he opened the door and entered that he realized just how bad the situation was. Shit. Leon hurriedly rushed in Julian's direction, his face falling as he noticed the severity of the wounds. What the hell happened? He scanned his surroundings but found that nothing was amiss. In fact, everything was completely normal. Noticing the severity of Julian's wounds, it felt like he had been in a tough battle. And yet. Hold on. Leon's face paled when he reached Julian. As he dropped to the ground, a look of horror swept over his face. No. Julian's state, it was a lot worse than he had originally expected. No, in fact, it was beyond worse. He's not breathing. Leon felt his entire body freeze at the realization. How could this? Placing his hand over his neck, he felt no pulse as well. He checked again, but the result was the same. Leon's hands started to tremble. The truth had yet to sink into his mind. How could it sink into his mind? There was no way Julian would die like this, right? How could he die like this? It makes no sense. Leon's chest started to tremble. Something pierced his chest as he looked at Julian. Why did it hurt so much? It wasn't supposed to be like this at the start. The two of them were merely people with two different circumstances trying to use each other for their own goals. This was how things were supposed to be from the start, and yet, before he knew it, the two of them had grown closer. Julian was no longer merely an acquaintance, but he was also a friend. Perhaps his only friend. He was someone that Leon had no trouble serving. Even though they usually joked with each other, those were merely jokes. Leon went along with it because he saw how fun it was to see Julian suffer. Yes, it was fun. He had some of the most fun in the most recent years that he had ever had in his entire life. So, you can't die just yet. Leon's hands continued to tremble, but he was able to quickly regain his calm. It wasn't over just yet. He could still feel that Julian's body was warm. That meant that he had only just recently been killed. In that case, it wasn't too late. Whew. Leon took a deep breath and soon closed his eyes. Blue veins soon started to manifest all around his body as a faint blue glow appeared from deep within his chest. Leon's expression started to twist as he began to experience a certain pain. However, he resisted the pain. He focused his entire attention on his inner body, towards the chalice that rested in his heart, and as his body started to shake, he began to place his hand into his chest, slowly retrieving the chalice from out of his body. Yuck! The pain was unimaginable. It felt as if his heart was being ripped out of his body. However, he bore through the pain. He had to bear through the pain. Ach! He was now a prince, but he was still his knight. He had yet to quit his job or be fired. He was useless. He had always failed in his job. In fact, it was always Julian who did most of the work. What sort of failure of a knight was he? KKH? Leon looked towards Julian on the floor as blood started to leak out of his nose. He smiled then. Why you can't say that I haven't done my job after this? Leon's face twisted as those words left his mouth, and gradually he managed to pull the chalice out of his body. Ha! Ha! Slumping over, his chest heaved up and down unevenly as he felt weak all over. But it wasn't over yet. He stared at the chalice in his hands, a complicated expression marring his features. But it's the only way. Staring at the black liquid within the chalice, Leon opened Julian's mouth and poured it down his throat. A change started to occur then. It's working. The wounds that marred Julian's body started to rapidly heal, recovering as though he had never sustained them in the first place. His complexion also started to turn rosy as he returned to how he once was. Leon's mind eased seeing this. Although the liquid within the chalice was extremely important for his growth and future, he didn't even hesitate to give it all to Julian. He could always get it again. Make more. Even if it would stunt his growth by years, he didn't regret it. After all, it's my duty. His duty as a knight. Clank. Clank. Once all the liquid entered Julian's body, overcome with weakness, Leon slumped back, the chalice falling onto the ground as Leon heavily gulped for air. It's done. The wounds on Julian's body had all healed. He should be out of danger now. Leon sighed in relief. His body was weak and he feared he might remain in such a state for at least a week, but he didn't regret his actions one bit. Slowly lifting his head, he turned his attention towards Julian, who still had his eyes closed. At a glance, he looked like he was sleeping. Leon felt relieved seeing this. However, that relief didn't last very long. Julian. Frowning, Leon forced himself back up as he moved towards Julian. At a glance, there didn't seem to be anything wrong. His actions had healed Julian completely. Logic would say that he should be good now. And yet, why? Leon pressed his hand against Julian's neck, his eyes widening. Why is he still not breathing? Leon took a deep breath to keep himself composed as he stood by Julian. Perhaps it takes time. I know for sure I wasn't too late since his body was still warm. He should theoretically be all good by now. So why? Why wasn't Julian's heart beating? Leon squeezed his mouth as he stared at Julian. He suddenly felt a sense of dread creep through the inner parts of his mind as his hands started to shake. It can't be, right? Leon looked at Julian, his expression slowly crumbling. A joke? Was this some sort of sick joke from Julian? Indeed, if it were Julian, he'd try to pull this sort of twisted joke. I'll play along. Leon stared at Julian's body, his eyes slowly turning bloodshot. You'll reveal it's a joke soon, right? Come on. I'm waiting. At the same time, in a different location, following the events that had transpired on the first day of the Congress, at the helm of the gathering was Cardinal Ambrose, the top delegate from the Church of Aurelius. First and foremost, we want to share our deepest condolences with everyone present. I'm sure none of us wanted the event to begin like that. The cardinal held onto a glass as he spoke. His expression was calm and serene as he addressed everyone present. While it is true that we were innocent, it is also true that we were too hasty with our actions. Everything happened so fast that we weren't able to properly assess the situation. I do hope that none of you present took offense at our actions. The many people present shook their heads, offering their own toast. Cardinal soaked in the atmosphere, his expression calm. However, his outer calmness was merely a facade. He was anything but calm. How could he not be worried when Jackal was out there completing such an important mission? Even though everything had been thoroughly planned in advance, with him hosting the event specifically to distract all the top powers as well as providing Jackal with enough force to take someone of Julian's caliber down, the Cardinal was still worried. What if it failed? What if Julian had some sort of trump card? He also had the blood so A. However, his worries only lasted for a few more minutes. It wasn't long before he received a message and his expression relaxed completely. He did it. The cardinal could hardly contain his joy. With Jackal having now completed his mission, it wouldn't be long before the Church of Oracleus would stand above all churches and even the Round Table. Ha ha. He suddenly burst out laughing, looking at everyone present with a serene smile. It pleases me so much to see all of you forgive us like this. I truly appreciate all of you present. His words were met with several comments filled with goodwill. At the end of the day, the Church of Oracleus was a well-respected church. Not only did they have a lot of influence in all 4 empires, but they were also rather strong. Who didn't want to get on their good graces? As the event was in full swing, Orson, alongside several delegates from the Naz and Sifa Empire, appeared in the corner of the venue. The atmosphere was rather light. Following the investigation by the Saintists, they understood that those from the Church of Oracleus were indeed innocent and that the masterminds behind the incident were someone else. While that investigation was still ongoing, they decided to send several delegates to attend the banquet. At the end of the day, they did try to save the emperor. Is everything all right? However, not all seemed to be pleased. Sensing something, Orson turned his attention towards Delilah, who sat in her seat, her eyes seemingly unfocused. She held a glass in her hand as her rosy lips pursed together. Although she looked no different than usual, as someone who had raised Delilah since young, Orson was aware that something was wrong. For good measure, he retrieved a piece of chocolate and handed it to her. Do you want this? He didn't even get a single glance. This pretty much confirmed to him that something was wrong. He was just about to ask her what was on her mind when someone suddenly rushed in and whispered something in his ear. His expression immediately shifted. Is this information real? Yes, we just learned of it. I understand. Orson closed his eyes before shifting his attention towards Delilah. He felt compelled to tell her, given that she was directly related to the news. Delilah. As if sensing that something was wrong, Delilah turned her attention towards her father, her eyes seemingly cold and detached. Feeling her gaze, Orson didn't waste a second and told her the news directly. One of your cadets has been attacked. I'm afraid he's passed away. Delilah's brows furrowed upon hearing the news, but the next words from Orson made her face change drastically. It's the Ivinus family kid. Bang. The glass in her hand shattered. Chapter 606, Coma 2. Under the faint light, a body lay on a bed. Though his complexion was rosy, there was no heartbeat, nor was there any breath. He was, in every sense of the word, dead. So, as a figure dressed in black garb stepped back, several anxious eyes looked in his direction. With a silence that felt like it would last forever, the figure eventually shook his head. I do not sense any breath or any soul within the body. I'm afraid that he's not dead. I'm sure he's not dead. Leon abruptly stood from the chair, cutting the cleric off mid-sentence. His hair was slightly disheveled and dark circles clung beneath his eyes as he fixed his gaze on Julian. He, of all people, knew that there was no way Julian was dead. The blood, it should have worked. And yet, I understand where you're coming from. This case, it is the first time I've seen something like this. Not offended in the least bit by Leon's actions, the cleric shook his head. In fact, he wasn't even sure why he was called in the first place. He dealt with souls and other related matters. He wasn't a medic. Nonetheless, he still complied considering the status of the people who had called for him. For some reason, the body appears to retain its basic self-sustaining functions, keeping it from decaying. But at the same time, there's no soul present. For lack of a better term, it's just an empty shell. I don't. Leon's expression paled as he shook his head. Even though he himself knew the answer, hearing it from the cleric felt like a massive dagger to his chest. He covered his mouth as it opened and closed repeatedly. However, the more he tried to speak, the more he found himself unable to find any words. In the end, he slumped down on the chair at a complete loss. How is it possible? I arrived on time. He should have still been able to live, it makes absolutely no sense. His expression was blank as he struggled to come to terms with the situation. He was also not the only one in the room. There were a few others in the room. Most notably, Atlas and several other higher-ups within the Empire. News of Julian's death had yet to be spread. In fact, only a very select few knew about the situation. Who has done this? Atlas's voice rang quietly across the room. When Leon raised his head, he almost felt his body shiver involuntarily as Atlas's gaze was fixed on Julian. He didn't seem either angry or sad. His expression was just neutral. And yet it was such a neutral expression that seemed to give chills to his entire body. We still don't know. Another person answered, shaking their head before turning towards Leon. He seemed to be one of the delegates belonging to the Megrail family. He's the one who has found Julian in such a state. Perhaps he might know something more. Atlas turned his head, his yellow eyes piercing right through Leon as he shook his head. I don't know. I really don't know. Thinking about how Julian found himself in such a situation, he felt at a complete loss. The place he found Julian was completely pristine, with no signs of battle whatsoever. However, recalling the wounds on Julian's body, he knew that he had been through a lot. Was he teleported elsewhere and brought back? That was the only way for Leon to explain the situation. He wasn't the only one who felt that this was the case. But at the same time, Considering how pristine his current condition is, I'm afraid that he must have dealt with some incredibly mind-mag. That's impossible. Leon suddenly cut through, arousing the attention of all those present. Upon realizing what he had done, Leon's face fell, but he clenched his teeth. At this very moment, he needed to know who was responsible for this. Sadness and mourning came later. Taking a deep breath, Leon calmed his fluctuating emotions and raised his head. He then began to recount everything that had happened and how he had found Julian. When I found Julian, he was filled with injuries. The state of his shirt and clothes should be direct proof of this. The clothes were all torn and filled with cuts. That alone was enough proof that he had gone through a fight. Several other people also seemed aware of this, but we also noticed that, but his body is completely unharmed. I've also tested his body, and Julian doesn't seem to have any experimental healing abilities. How would you, It's possible that the ones responsible healed him in order to hide any traces of their techniques. Leon abruptly cut in. He didn't reveal to them that he was the one who had healed Julian's wounds. That was for a very obvious reason. And even if he did, it wouldn't change much of a thing. The ones who had done this were extremely careful. That's true. Atlas nodded, his gaze unnervingly calm. For them to also do it so silently and secretly. They're not an ordinary group. Though he said this, he seemed to have a clue as to who the ones responsible for this were. In fact, he wasn't the only one. Who did it? Leon's lips quivered as he felt extremely tempted to ask, but he stopped himself as he noticed the figure standing in the corner of the room. She had been silent the entire time, her face passive and seemingly unaffected by everything. However, her gaze, it had never once left Julian's body. It just lingered there the entire time, her thoughts unknown. Leon looked at her, his brows furrowing. Taking a look at her, she seemed completely unaffected, and yet… Hey! He blinked. She was gone. Vanished. Like she'd never been there. What the… He didn't bother looking for her. Instead, he turned back to Julian's body, and his expression cracked. He suddenly started to recall everything that the two had gone through together, and his chest began to feel heavy again. Was this really? How's the situation? Delilah stepped into a modestly sized room, its walls adorned with quiet paintings that seemed to watch in silence. Plush sofas lined the space, and on one of them sat Orson, his expression grave as his eyes met hers. Is he? Yes. Delilah answered, her tone cold and even. It almost sounded as though she was completely unaffected by the situation. He is dead. There's no breath in him. I see. Orson closed his eyes and leaned back. What a pity. He was so young and talented. Some even compared him to you in terms of talent. Orson shook his head in disappointment. Talented individuals like Delilah were extremely rare, and even though there had been several that had been born before, none of them ever matured, with them dying before they could do so. Delilah was one such talent. If not for him taking her in, she would have. Are there any clues as to who the one responsible for this? No. Delilah shook her head, and Orson paused as he looked at her. She looked normal at a glance, and yet something about her felt a little off. Even though he knew her quite well, this was the first time he had ever seen her act like this. She was cold? So cold. To the point where it felt like the surroundings were about to freeze. I guess she must be in shock. Thinking about it, Julian was her responsibility as the Chancellor of Haven. In his mind, Delilah was probably feeling guilty for not being able to save him or notice a thing. Don't beat yourself too much, Delilah. At the end of the day, none of us was able to notice a thing. I understand. Delilah merely nodded her head before heading towards her room. Orson could only watch as she entered her room and closed the door. Clank. His face grew serious then as he took out his communication device and quickly messaged the others. He needed to get to the bottom of the situation. Asterisk. On the other hand, quietly entering her room, Delilah found herself surrounded by the dark. It embraced her from all sides. She didn't bother turning on the light and just sat down, embracing the darkness. She sat there in silence, her gaze lost and cold. The coldness persisted until she retrieved her communication device. Though subtle, her hand quivered as she opened it for the first time in a couple of days. It was then that she noticed several missing messages. All belonging from him. Delilah's gaze remained cold as she looked at the messages. Opening her lips, she closed them soon after as she pressed onto the messages and read them. It was a joke. I'm not actually getting married. Such was the first message that she saw. Her face remained indifferent as it hovered down to the next message. I don't know why you reacted like that, but I really was just joking. I thought you get it, but was I not obvious enough? There were quite a lot of texts. All of them said the same thing, but at the same time, the more she scrolled down, the more the messages changed. Did you see the message? He was persistent. Too persistent. I take it you haven't. Are you still mad at me? Yes, I am. I'm going to the Congress today. I'll try to clear the misunderstanding. I bet you'll find it funny once this is all over. So you're really mad, huh? Yes, so stop texting. I'm sorry. Stop it. Ayo. Clank. The communication device rolled down the floor as Delilah's hand quivered along her face. The indifference that had been marring her features was long gone, and in its stead was a constant quivering that she couldn't hide. Slowly, she brought her hand to her chest as a pain she had never felt before stabbed right through her heart. It hurt. It hurt so much. Delilah's lips continued to quiver as her gaze eventually fell on the small red diary on her desk. As her gaze wandered to it, the pain in her chest intensified. And yet, she found herself unable to stop herself from reaching for it, scrolling through it. Her gaze fell on all the bullet points that she had written. Some entries even drew a smile from her, though it wasn't a happy one. The more she smiled, the deeper the ache in her chest grew. And in the end, she reached the last page. Staring at the last page, her face grew blank. She planned to fill more of it. Her plan was to fill the entire diary. And yet, that no longer seemed possible. A strained sound left her lips as her hand trembled. Eventually reaching out for a pen, she wrote in the diary. The last ever point. The one I love. And the most painful one. Chapter 607, Reunion, 1. A figure sat motionless within the darkness. The darkness didn't just surround him, it bent and curled inward, folding like fabric pulled by invisible threads. And then Atlas emerged before the figure. He immediately knelt on one knee, his expression hard to decipher as Cithras slowly opened his eyes to see Atlas. Oh my! All that Cithras saw when staring at Atlas was red. His entire body. It was red. It is rare to see you so angry, Dawn. I'm a little curious to know what happened, but before that. Cithras raised his hand and lowered it. Immediately, the red that seemed to want to seep out of Atlas's body started to fade, concentrating into a thick ball of red that focused within Atlas's abdomen. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, the orb shot forth, funneling directly into Cithras's open mouth. He closed his eyes as it entered, a satisfied smile curling across his face. Not bad. Opening his eyes again, he settled his gaze over to Atlas. Have you calmed yourself down? Yes. Atlas gave a slow nod, the tension in his features melting away. His expression was calmer now, composed, like a storm had passed through him and left only stillness in its wake. Good. Now then. Cithras tilted his head curiously at Atlas. Why have you come here, and what managed to set you off so much? Atlas knelt in silence for a few short seconds before letting out a deep breath and speaking. Julian has passed away. Julian. Cithras raised his brow. Yes. His body was recently found in his room, his soul completely missing. I see. Cithras's face didn't change much upon hearing the news. At least, not at first. After a few seconds, his hand reached for his mouth as his brows furrowed. Dead. And yet I was almost certain that he was. His thoughts paused after a few short seconds as a smile soon marred his features. I see. I see. Maybe I was looking at things the wrong way. Maybe from the very start he was just a diversion. Catching Cithras's quiet muttering, Atlas could only tilt his head in puzzlement. Yet, despite his curiosity, he didn't dare ask for an explanation. He was in no position to pry his thoughts. Do you have a clue as to who the ones responsible for this are? Yes. Atlas nodded, his back straightening as his eyes grew sharp. He was almost sure of his guess. In fact, it wasn't very hard to guess. He thought about Julian's action during the Nizansifa Congress Day. He thought about how he had been indirectly responsible for getting them locked up and humiliated in front of everyone. He thought about how everyone had been invited by them on that very specific day. He thought about how the saint had been missing on that day. Atlas had a very good guess as to who had done this to Julian, and as he looked at Cithras, his lips parted. I have reason to believe it is those of the Church of Oriclue. In the middle of his words, Atlas froze, suddenly catching the shift in Cithras's expression, his smile stretching unnaturally wide, teetering on the edge of something unsettling. It was enough to send shivers down his spine. His lips parted, but no words came out. That was until Cithras spoke. This is very interesting. He almost seemed to be enjoying the situation. To think he would fool me like that. As expected, only he can do something like that. Beyond the amusement, there seemed to be something else mixed in Cithras's voice. Was it anger? Surprise? Atlas couldn't tell, but the current state of Cithras was enough to give chills to his entire body. Slowly standing up, Cithras massaged his neck as he looked at Atlas. If it's what I'm thinking, your pupil cannot be saved. His words were calm, but they were enough to make Atlas's features change. He can't be saved? Wait, but Emmett is about to wake up. Cithras's next words brought Atlas's words to a complete halt as his eyes widened significantly. He of course was aware as to who Emmett was. How could he not know? I previously thought that Julian was Emmett's agent. From the familiar scent of the extractor to his familiar personality. I waited patiently. Even as he managed to ensnare you with his charm. I waited to see what he planned on doing. And yet, Cithras laughed. He had never been his agent from the start. He was just the unfortunate victim of Emmett's plan. Listening to Cithras's words, Atlas could only stand dumbfounded. Emmett's agent? Waited to see what he planned. What? You don't get it, do you? Atlas slowly turned his head towards Cithras, whose gaze seemed to pierce through the darkness as if seeing far beyond what lay in front of them. It is time that we set everything that we've planned over the years in motion. Turning around, Cithras's smile slowly faded as the darkness started to swallow him whole. Oracleus is coming. Several days have passed since the incident. Julian's death brought no waves to the world. And that was merely because the news had yet to spread or be announced. This silence was entirely at the behest of Viscount Ivinus, who had chosen to keep it hidden. Out of respect for him, the Academy alongside the Megrail family agreed to his terms. This also worked best for them. News of such a talented individual passing away was never great. Everyone had their own self-interest at heart. Aldrich was no different. To him, news of Julian's death meant putting a halt to a lot of the plans he had already set in motion. He couldn't afford to have that happen to him. At least, not yet. We're truly sorry for your loss. We're currently investigating the masterminds behind the incident and we will update you immediately on the situation. I understand. Aldrich's face was cold as the delegates from the Empire arrived at his home, delivering Julian's breathless body to him. He stood in silence while staring at his son's body. His lack of reaction made the delegates uncomfortable, but they still chose to keep their mouths shut. At the end of the day, they were only here to deliver the body. He was a great talent and is truly a... It's all right. Aldrich cut the delegates off before they could continue speaking. I'm not interested in the unnecessary speech. You may go. Yes. The delegates didn't linger for very long. Shortly after handing over Julian's body to the Viscount, they quickly departed. By the time they were long gone, Aldrich had already brought the body away into what was originally Julian's room. None of the servants or people working in the estate were aware of his actions or situation. And even if they were, they'd turn a blind eye to it. This was how things worked in the Ivinus household. After laying Julian's body on the bed, Aldrich stood over him, his expression void of emotion. His face was cold, his eyes distant and unfocused. To anyone watching, he would have seemed like a stranger, detached as if he had no connection to the lifeless figure before him. And yet, he was Julian's own father. Placing his finger over Julian's neck, Aldrich soon closed his eyes. The body shows no signs of decay, it almost seems to be preserving itself naturally. That is quite good. Opening his eyes again, he brought his fingers away and sat down on the nearby chair. As he did, his gaze hovered towards Julian's body again. He sat in silence for a few short seconds before the first cracks appeared on his face. Things are progressing as they should. I don't sense any of his blood anymore. That means that those from the church have taken it. By his blood, he meant none other than Aurelius's blood. For the first time in what felt like ages, Aldrich's expression began to shift as the cracks on his face started to expand. His lips trembled, and to conceal it, he brought a clenched fist to his mouth, leaning back into his chair in a quiet attempt to compose himself. However, in spite of his best attempt, he still let out a brief stifle as his lips pulled into a smile. Ha! His chest trembled as he found himself unable to hold his laugh back. He thought back to the start of the Congress and the sequence of events that had led to this very moment. Everything. It had gone as intended. Though it's unfortunate that I had to part ways with such a talented spirit user, it all works out in the end. The entire sequence of events that had occurred in the Congress was no coincidence. From the reporter to the fact that Julian had been sent there. It had all been planned for this very moment. By now, he likely believes Aurelius is on the verge of awakening and that Julian was merely a fake all along. This will buy us quite a lot of valuable time. The smile on Aldrich's face widened in spite of his best attempts at trying to suppress it. But how could he not smile? He had been waiting for this very moment for a long time. A very, very, very long time. Enough time to make anyone go mad. But he persisted. He persisted because he was told to persist. And all of it finally paid off. Staring in Julian's direction, Aldrich's lips slowly parted as his chest began to tremble and the cold facade he had been keeping up for so long started to fade. I did good, right? Aldrich mumbled, the smile slipping away from his face as it was replaced by a raw, unfiltered emotion. Aldrich's lips trembled, but he just barely managed to force out a few words, his voice barely audible. All right? And just as the words left his mouth, Julian's eyes slowly opened. The once empty vessel returned to life as Julian's gaze focused on the ceiling of the room. He blinked a couple of times, sitting up to meet Aldrich's gaze. His expression quickly turned complicated shortly after as his mouth opened and closed several times before he finally managed a single word out. Noel. Chapter 608, Reunion 2. It was dark. The darkness stretched all around me, wrapping around me with its cold touch. What's going on? I didn't understand what was happening. It felt as though I was drifting in this endless darkness with no end in sight. Am I dead? It was also then that I recalled what had happened prior to finding myself in this situation, and my heart sank. Indeed, there was no way I could have survived something like that. Attacked by several opponents at once, some even stronger than me, it was nothing short of a miracle that I managed to pull off what I did. But even then, it wasn't enough. I was still unable to survive. The realization left me completely unresigned as I continued to drift in this pitch-black darkness. The darkness thickened, growing colder with every passing second, each one dragging on as if it would never end. I just drifted in the darkness, waiting for my soul to slowly fade away. I thought about everything. From Noel to Leon and everyone that I knew. Most importantly, I also thought about her. Would she even care if I died? She did seem pretty angry at me towards the end. Angry enough to look at me like that. Perhaps it's good that she hated me in the last moments of my life. It made the pain in my chest ease. At least, I now knew she wouldn't be affected much by my death. I felt better knowing that. And yet, the pain remained. It clung to me buried deep within my chest, clawing its way inward as if trying to wrench my heart wide open. It hurt. It hurt so much. And the more it hurt, the more I started to feel something amiss. For someone who was supposed to be dead, this pain felt a little too real. Too raw. How could that be? And then I felt it. The faint warmth coming from several directions. The darkness around me began to lift as I slowly raised my head, only to find myself surrounded on all sides by countless orbs of light, gently floating in the void. Staring into those orbs, my chest tingled. What is? The orbs, they seemed to be calling out for me, beckoning me. As my gaze lingered on the orbs, I watched in awe as they began to grow, expanding rapidly in my vision before hurtling toward me at an unimaginable speed. I was shocked at first, almost scared. The shock quickly faded as I sensed no threat from the orbs. Though they hadn't reached me yet, a deep instinct told me they meant no harm. And sure enough, when they drew near, they stopped, suspended in the void just before me. I stood in silence, staring at them without saying a single word. There were quite a few of them, and as I looked around me, they all felt like glowing stars. I slowly reached out for them, and the cold that had engulfed my body started to fade away completely. The closer I came to the orb, the warmer it became, and as soon as my hand entered the orb, it suddenly felt as though my mind blanked. In that moment, I started to feel in control of everything, as though the world seemed to be at the palm of my hands. Yet, despite that feeling, it didn't seem like I had become stronger in the traditional sense. No, this change ran deeper. It was as if I had gained a newfound mastery over my mana and emotive magic, a level of control I had never dreamed possible before. In this state, it felt like I could control my emotive magic to a point where I could have the same effect as when touching someone through speech. At the same time, I also felt like I could control the threads and skills in ways I had never thought possible. The sensation. It was euphoric, addicting. And the more I immersed myself in the feeling, the more it felt as though my mind was slowly starting to fade. No. I quickly snapped myself out of it, pulling my hand away and moving away from the white orb. What in the world was that? A newfound sense of dread invaded my chest as I stared at the orb. For a moment, I almost thought I was going to disappear. However, at the same time, I thought about the strange power provided by the orb. For some reason, it felt familiar. Yes, familiar. As though I had touched this sort of power in the past. But I don't remember ever touching something like this before. My mind churned as my thoughts drifted towards this strange power. The more I tried to think, the emptier my mind felt. No, nothing. I couldn't recall ever experiencing anything like this before. This was the first time I had ever experienced something like this. A strange black world filled with SD. It was then that I suddenly recalled something and my chest grew heavier. Indeed, I had never experienced this sensation before. I was now sure of it. But that only applied to my current self. What about my past self? This? I recalled Leon's and Jackal's earlier explanation, and suddenly everything began to fall into place. What I was experiencing now, it was none other than the source Jackal had spoken of. The strange power that seemed to belong to the gods. And the moment the realization hit me, the orbs around me suddenly started to stir into life. What is happening? Noticing the shift, I tensed up instantly. Based on what I'd experienced before, the source was terrifying, an overwhelming force that felt like it could consume me whole at any moment. I didn't feel at ease with the sudden changes. The orbs around me began to wiggle, shifting and weaving through the void, and my entire body tightened with unease. I kept my eyes locked on them, every muscle primed to react at the slightest hint of danger. I was ready. Ready to move. But then. How? My entire body froze on the spot as my mouth slowly opened in shock. An utterly unexpected sight unfolded before my eyes as the orbs expanded, their forms warping and shifting to reveal a cascade of scenes, each one vivid, surreal. And within them, I saw myself. There was the Julian version of me. The Emmett version. The past me. Every fragment, every life, every version, I was in all of them. And slowly, the scenes started to enter my mind. Not all, but some. I felt a sharp pain stab right through my mind as the scenes entered my mind, each one different than the other. I started to recall things that I had long forgotten, and the fine line that separated me from the other version of me in the visions started to fade. I was slowly starting to integrate with all my previous memories. Or at least tried to. There were far too many memories and moments. I understood that it was impossible for me to digest everything at once in one go. It would take time for that to happen. And just as the pain in my mind started to get overwhelming, it all stopped. The world grew silent. That was until. At some point, I'll need you to step in. I heard the sound of my voice drift in the void. I lifted my head and glanced around, searching for the source of the voice. But it didn't take long to realize it wasn't coming from around me. It was echoing from deep within my own mind. This conversation. I started to recall saying such words in the past. They were to someone. Dewey. To make this work, I'll have to die and let go of these powers. It's the only way to divert Torin's attention away from me. He's sharp. By now, he's likely pieced together fragments of my identity. He'll try to get close, to study me, to strike when I least expect it. I need to let him think I was merely a ruse. A fake meant to distract him from the real me. The more the conversation dragged on, the more I started to understand. A scene fleshed itself in my mind. And soon enough, another voice echoed. I understand. My heart clenched. That was Noel's voice. I'll do it, but. His voice was the same as ever. However, I could see the traces of hesitation and fear in his voice. That was when I remembered trying to comfort him. Don't worry. We'll see each other once all of this is over. I know you'll be by my side the entire time. I want you to watch over me while you greedily consume everything around you. Before then, you must persist. I won't be allowed to do anything? You need to understand your position, Noelle. You are in no position to do anything but use your mind. Use that mind of yours to your advantage. I'll be waiting. I understand. The voice stepped there. However, my mind didn't. It continued to churn, replaying the scenes over and over again. I know you'll be by my side the entire time? Noelle was with me the entire time? My heart pressed. Then it suddenly started to hit me. Leon. Noelle, Leon, eh? Noelle. Leon was Noelle spelled backwards. My heart squeezed at the realization. Could it be? But then. No, he's not. The part of me that was slowly starting to assimilate with my memories told me that wasn't the case. And most importantly, the clues were starting to filter into my mind. Leon's real name is not Leon. Who named him Leon? Aldrich. He was the one who named Leon. Ah. From the very start, it was right under my nose. Julian's weird obsession with swords. Who planted them into his mind? I thought about how Emmett was originally a sword user and my lips quivered. It all suddenly started to make sense. Aldrich. Leon's strange sword art. The one that I felt so familiar with. Who truly gave it to him? What about his strange ability to heal? I knew Leon told me he had found it, but did he really? I didn't need to think to know the answer. It was yet again Aldrich. And most importantly, that unique sword art, who did it originally belong to? In that moment, everything started to make sense. The weird sense of oppression I felt from him whenever I interacted with him and his ability to think several steps ahead. And why I felt so in tune with Leon's strange sword art from the moment I saw it in spite of me not being talented in the sword with this body. Aldrich. He was none other than Noelle. My brother. And as that thought echoed through my mind, the world around me burst into blinding light. In the next instant, I was staring up at a blank ceiling. Slowly sitting upright, I turned my head and saw a pair of hazel eyes staring in my direction. I stared at his face for a few moments, but those moments felt like they stretched into eternity. Slowly, my lips parted and a name left my lips. Noelle. A name I wanted to say for so long. Chapter 609, Reunion 3. From the start. I pressed my lips, my chest growing heavy as I stared at the figure sitting opposite me. His face was different. His build was different and everything about him felt different. He was so different from the brother that I knew. And that shit hurt more than I expected. Just how much has he gone through to be like this? You were always here, watching over me. I closed my eyes, feeling my chest tremble as a certain pain surfaced from deep within. The more I thought about the situation and the struggle Noelle had gone through, the more obvious it became to me how incompetent I was as an older brother. I don't need your apology. Noelle's voice suddenly cut through the silence. Staring at me, he sighed. You're always like this. You never change. But I'm glad you haven't changed. He seemed a little relieved as he spoke. I opened my mouth but soon closed it. That was because I noticed a sudden shift in Noelle's expression as he looked at me. Taking a deep breath, Noelle leaned back on his chair. He seemed to have calmed his previously fluctuating emotions and appeared more level-headed. The change took me a little by surprise. He really had changed a lot since the last time I had seen him. What? As if sensing my thoughts, Noelle looked at me with a smile. You thought I'd cry like in the past? That I'd come over and hug you until you comforted me? Haha. I let out a bitter laugh. He was spot on. I would, to be honest. Noelle's words took me a little by surprise. However, his next words made my expression turn serious. But I don't want to do it like this. At least, not in the state that I currently am. What do you mean? Noelle didn't answer me. Instead, he started to unbutton his shirt while taking off his blazer. My brows furrowed at the sight, but I didn't overreact. I knew he was trying to show me something. And soon, Noelle removed his shirt. What? My expression crumbled the moment he did so as I felt my breath get stripped away from me. I stared at Noelle, lips trembling as my gaze lowered towards his chest. Or more precisely, the gaping hole on his chest. My entire body started to tremble. They took my heart. Anger started to surge from deep within my body. I could hardly contain it. I'm alive and yet am not. I merely function as a walking corpse while they use my heart to fuel their lives, carelessly giving it away as if it's some sort of prized reward. Rattle. Rattle. The bed beneath rattled. I was starting to see red. I can feel it whenever they squeeze my heart and extract my blood from it. I can feel everything. Noelle's expression paled. I'm supposed to be immortal and yet I can feel that my heart is slowly dying out. They've also started to notice it, hence why they've stopped giving it away like candy while preventing anyone from having it. Rattle. The rattling grew more intense, the rage within my body threatening to explode at any given second. And it was just as it was about to explode that a sudden memory flashed in my mind. Why would you do this? I thought we were on the same side. How could you? How could you? Same side? Ha! You. Torin, there are things I see, things so far beyond your grasp, they would tear your very soul apart if you could glimpse them. They follow me, relentlessly, through my sleep, they bleed into my daydreams and they torment me whenever they have a chance. But in these sights, these truths. I never asked for them, yet they are mine to bear, dragging me into the abyss whether I wish to look or not. I am cursed to see what others cannot even imagine, and it is a curse that bleeds through every moment of my existence. Why you have gone mad, Emmett. You have gone mad. Maybe I have. No, I probably have. But in my madness I am sane enough to know that you all must die. The anger seemed to fade almost instantly. It all started to click then as my eyes closed. Indeed, they all must die. I took a silent breath before opening my eyes again and staring at Noel, who had put his shirt back on. His expression was calm, but I could see the pain in his eyes as he sat down and looked at me. Now that Torin has set his sights away from you, we managed to secure some time for ourselves. We should be able to last until the bait dies. By bait, I understood immediately what he was trying to say. He meant Jackal. From the very start, this had been a scheme in order to use him to lure Torin away from us while buying some valuable time. It also became clear to me that Sithris was probably aware of my identity as Emmett. He might have not done a thing because he was watching me or perhaps was next to me all along. I hoped it wasn't the latter. The plan worked flawlessly, but if there was one thing that left me disappointed, it was the fact that I no longer had the ability to see visions. Not only that, but the system was gone as well. Looking at the 4-leaf clover on my arm, I saw that all the leaves were dim. Even if I tried pressing one of the leaves, I knew it would lead to nothing. I had essentially lost all powers related to Heraclius. This left me at a complete loss, especially since it was all I relied on to grow in spite of my lacking body. Now that I could no longer grow with such means, I felt handicapped. What was I going to do from this point forward? You're worrying too much. Noel comforted me as though he could read my thoughts. Seeing how you're looking at your arm, I presume you're worried about your powers. Yes. A complicated expression marred Noel's face in that moment. Then you don't have to worry too much. You'll eventually get them back. I know. There was no doubt in my mind that I would get them back. I was just at a loss with regards to what I'd have to do from this point forward. You know, and yet you're still making such a face? Haha. I could only laugh. I'm just thinking about what to do from this point forward. Without those powers, I'm essentially weaker than before. I know I'll get them back, but how long do you? It won't be too long. Noel cut through my words, his expression stern. This prompted me to raise my brow, and just as I was about to ask why, his lips parted. The powers that we wield are not things that regular humans should be able to wield. Our powers, they're all essentially borrowed powers. We never truly grasped them for ourselves. What? I looked at Noel in confusion, his words leaving me at a loss. We never truly grasped them for ourselves? What could he? You're the biggest example, brother. I am. Yes. Noel nodded while letting out a long breath. Pointing at me, his tone grew hoarse. You were the first of all 7 of us to lose yourself in the power. What? I opened my eyes wide. However, thinking about it and recalling certain moments and scenes, I knew that this was most likely the truth. Your powers were the strongest of all of us. You suddenly started to change. You became different. Colder, more pragmatic, and everything you did seemed to have a purpose. Maybe this is why you had yourself erase your memories. Maybe. Noel took a pause, staring directly at me. Maybe you were afraid of going mad again. I took a deep breath upon hearing his words. If it was like he said, then it made sense. I had always thought about the reasons why I found myself in this strange new world with memories that seemed to be completely different from the truth. In the end, was the reason just because I didn't want myself to remember all that I knew? Or was there more to it? I wasn't sure, but there was something else that I was more curious about. You said something about us never grasping these powers of ourselves. What do you mean by that? I mean what I mean. Noel answered, his eyes closing faintly. These powers don't belong to us. They were bestowed upon us when the meteorite came down and destroyed everything. They allowed us to immediately gain access to the source and make us gods. But the source is not something that anyone can just tap with borrowed power. In the end, it will reject anyone who tries to grasp it without full knowledge of it. With his expression turning complicated again, Noel looked at me. He didn't have to say anything for me to understand what he was trying to imply. So in the end, I got too close to the source and got rejected by it? Turning mad? That's one of the theories I've come up with. Ho! I let out a short breath and blankly stared at the ceiling. So in the end, is it even possible to tap into the source without the borrowed power? Of course it is. Noel nodded, his gaze changing as he looked at me. Didn't you just do it now? Ha! But there's none of your old blood inside your body. You managed to tap into it completely by yourself. But not for long. That doesn't matter. You still managed to tap into it, and that's enough proof of what you need to do. I blinked my eyes slowly. Proof of what I needed to do? What did I? You need to be the 8th. My eyes widened as I looked at Noel. Don't tell me. Noel slowly nodded his head, his expression as serious as ever. Sithris is also aware of it and is working towards it. Noel pressed his hand against his chest. The key is in everything that you've learned so far. Emotions. The words unconsciously flowed out of my mouth as Noel nodded. Yes, you need to become the 8th god. The god of emotions. Chapter 610, Reunion 4. I'm sure Torin has already figured the same thing you figured out a while back, but the key to becoming a true god lies in a mode of magic. My gaze subconsciously drifted towards my right arm where a 4-leaf clover tattoo appeared. A few things started to make sense. Is this why I was given this tattoo? That's correct. Noel calmly answered with a nod. The tattoo was meant to help you grasp emotions more clearly, a way to push you into truly understanding them. especially for someone like you who struggles with emotional awareness. Oh! I laughed bitterly. I wanted to refute his words, but I couldn't. Indeed, thinking back with regards to my past, I knew nothing about emotions, nor was I very good at understanding them. If not for the tattoo's powers, it would have been impossible for me to get to where I was. My talent in emotions. Perhaps it wasn't as high as I thought it was. But even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. The deeper I delved into emotions, the more fluent I became in understanding them. I had now reached a point where the tattoo was no longer necessary for me to improve on my emotive magic, and that was probably the goal from the very start. You'll eventually get your powers back once all of this is over. However, for now, you'll have to make do with what you have. I already understand this much. Thinking about it, I almost felt pity for Jackal. Not only was he currently under Sithrus's watch and hunt, but he was also probably going to lose his mind. The powers were probably going to consume him soon enough. I had to bide my time. Only when the powers began to completely overtake his mind did the moment come for me to take them back. Still, there was something that I was curious about. I turned to Noel. If you say that the powers made me lose my mind, wouldn't it be more appropriate for me to just let go of them? Losing Oracleus's powers did suck, but at the same time I could do without it. I had reached a point where I could. If I just poured all of my attention on my emotive magic, I was confident in reaching the 5th level not far from now. If keeping them meant losing my mind, then it would be for the best if I let go of them. No, you need them. Noel was quick to shut down my thoughts as he stood up and shook his head. Reaching the source alone is extremely hard. The powers will serve as a gateway for you to reach the source and, in turn, understand it better. Though the moment you gain your powers back, you'll start to lose your mind again. If you manage to grasp the source, the sense of rejection will disappear and you'll be able to use both powers without any problem. So that's what you mean. I more or less started to understand the situation. In order to access the source easily, I needed to take my old powers back. The moment I gained access to the source, my goal was to try to understand it and become the 8th god. The key to all of this was emotive magic. Although I didn't understand why that was the case, that wasn't important as of this very moment. The most important part was getting stronger and furthering my emotive magic. Bringing my fist near my mouth, I bit my finger. My thoughts drifted towards the entire situation as I tried to think about the next steps that I needed to take in order to further my emotive magic. However, these thoughts vanished the moment I looked up and saw Noel staring at me. Oh, right? How could I forget? You probably have everything planned out, don't you? Noel stared at me for a brief moment before suddenly cracking a smile. Of course I do. He flicked his hand and a map appeared out of thin air. Laying it out on the table next to me, he started to explain. This is the Eclipsed Maw. It's located in one of the larger red zones within the mirror dimension. My eyes squinted as I looked at the map. For some reason, the shape of this red zone felt familiar. It also appeared to be surrounded by red coloring. Was that the sea? As if reading my thoughts, Noel smiled. It's Australia. Well, more or less. It's a little different, but it's what remains of Australia. Ah, no wonder it felt so familiar. Leaving that aside, it's important that you go here. Why is that? Because that's where you'll find Oracleus's eye. Eh? I paused and looked at Noel, who kept his gaze firmly locked onto the map. I'm sure you are aware that the relics are key in all of this. You might not know why, but that's not important right now. The most important thing is collecting them. You should, by now, be in possession of the mirror and extractor. Yes. Leon should be holding the chalice. I swallowed quietly. It seemed like Noel was already aware of everything from the start. Looking at him now and seeing his serious expression, he felt foreign again. He felt like the Aldrich that made me shiver whenever I looked at him. As expected, he really had changed. But even though he changed, he was still my brother. The last relic is the Oracle's Eye. It's probably the most important relic of all 4. Torin most likely thinks it's hidden somewhere in the academy, but it's not. Noel pointed directly at the map. It's right here and you have to collect it at all costs. Me. I blinked my eyes. What about you? Me? Noel turned his head and looked at me with a bitter look. In my state, I can hardly kill a fly. I'll be the one to die, and I can't die. The moment I die will be the moment Torin finds me. Noel's face suddenly tightened, his expression turning grim as he quietly mumbled, I don't want to be locked up again. I really don't. Anything but that. I pursed my lips, forcing a breath out. From the way he spoke those final words and the look on his face, I could tell his life hadn't been easy in my absence. I couldn't begin to imagine the kind of torment he'd endured while I was away. The thought alone. It pissed me beyond any measure. Yes, it's about time that I fulfilled my job. I quietly nodded my head and placed my hand over the map. All right, I'll do it. Noel smiled without looking at me. He then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I'm sure you must be tired since you just woke up from death, but I don't think we have the luxury of time. Ah, yes. Neither one of us knew how much time we had at our disposal. It all depended on Jackal. For how long could he last against Sithrus? He had the backing of the church and the round table, but could he really do anything about someone as powerful as Sithrus? Neither of us could really put an estimate on the time, which was why it was important to act immediately. There are not that many cracks that you can enter to reach the Eclipsed Maw. Your best bet would be to enter that crack, but... Noel's face turned complicated as he looked at me. What's wrong? That... Noel scratched the tip of his nose before sighing. You understand that your current position, right? I do. What was he talking about? And why did he seem so concerned? Torin is no longer the same Torin of the past. He's different. He has eyes and ears everywhere. There aren't many places he can't see or hear. What you think might be your closest friend could very well be him. I swallowed quietly. I know that. How could I not know that? I had experienced it all already. He's most likely already gotten close to you. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I wanted to refute his words, but I didn't know how. But where was he going with this? That's why it's important for you to remain dead. Even though most people think you're still alive, those who do know should keep thinking that way. Ah! I finally understood where Noel was trying to get at and the place that we needed to go in order to enter the mirror dimension. It was none other than the academy. To where she was. Nobody must know that you're still alive. I took a deep breath, pursing my lips at the same time. In all honesty, I knew this from the very start. Noel didn't need to remind me. However, he probably felt the need to after seeing my reaction the moment he mentioned the academy. He's right. For now, I must remain dead. There was no other way around it. Cithras was that scary. Neither one of us could take a chance. But even then, as a certain figure drifted in my mind, I slowly brought my hand to my chest while trying my best to forget about the pain. Surely if it's her, it should be fine, right? There was simply no way for Delilah to be linked to the inverted sky and Cithras. I had seen her hatred firsthand. If it's... No, don't think about it. Noel cut through my thoughts as though he could see through them. Brother. His expression turned softer as he looked at me. He seemed to want to help me, but he soon shook his head. We can't take any chances. I'm sorry. No, I understand. I stopped Noel there and then. He didn't need to say any more. He had already suffered so much, and yet here I was lamenting over something like this. What sort of brother was I? Slap. I slapped both sides of my cheeks before taking the map with me. Let's not waste any more time. Wait. Noel called out to me just as I was about to move. As I slowly turned my head, I saw him staring at me with a smile. I paused as our eyes met. And then, it's good to see you again, brother. He scratched the back of his head, his cold expression vanishing, replaced by an all-too-familiar expression as his eyes moved away from me. I just wanted to say that. My lips trembled, but soon I drew enough force to nod my head. It's good to see you too. Chapter 611, Failure of a Night, 1. It's been a while, I muttered, staring at the window of the carriage as I stared at the familiar outer scenery. Although I said that, it wasn't actually a long time since I had last seen the academy. In fact, it had barely been a week. But it just felt like it had been forever. Remember, try your best not to reveal anything about your identity. Your goal here is to enter the crack and enter the mirror dimension. I know. I didn't need to be reminded by Noel. In fact, he had been reminding me of the same thing over and over again. Was I that untrustworthy? No, rather than him not trusting me, it's more like he's extremely paranoid. Indeed, he didn't want to go through it all over again. I understood, and so, without a word, I closed my eyes as the carriage rolled forward. Although I tried my best to remain calm, I had a hard time remaining so as my thoughts continued to drift to the academy. What would happen if I met her? What about them? Realistically, it shouldn't have been possible. Noel had personally taken steps to hide my face. But could he really keep it hidden from them? Perhaps in the past, but the current him. We're here. The carriage came to a gentle stop and the door creaked open. Noel stepped out first, sunlight spilling in. He then turned around and looked at me. Are you ready? I am. I nodded in silence while similarly stepping out, allowing for the glow of the sun to fully bathe me. Then, turning my head, I saw the all-too-familiar academy gates. I felt my chest squeeze at the sight as I followed Aldrich from behind, several attendants following suit. And soon, arriving before the academy gates, a figure appeared. The moment she appeared, it was as if the air had been sucked from my lungs, leaving me utterly breathless. With her soft black hair dancing in the wind and cold eyes, she arrived before all of us, her stunning appearance gathering the attention of the few around. My mind blanked at the sight of her. But at the same time, my heart ached. Thank you for coming. She greeted Aldrich first, barely glancing in our direction. Her eyes met mine for the briefest moment before moving on, offering the same fleeting look to the others. So she didn't see through the disguise. A part of me was happy with the development, but at the same time, I felt lost. As I looked at her, taking in that familiar cold expression of hers, a thought crept into my mind: why does she still look the same? She looked no different than before. It was almost as though my death had not affected her at all. I obviously knew that that was probably not the case, but what if? What if she truly did not care? Thinking back on the way she had looked at me before, my lips quivered faintly. That might truly be the case. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The pain in my chest intensified as the thought crept up in my mind, and in that moment, I had no choice but to do it. I shut down all my emotions. Gone. This pain. I couldn't take it. Puff. Smoke drifted within the confines of a large common room. With her eyes carelessly drifting across the smoke, Kira raised her hand and twirled the smoke around her finger. She sat there like that, her eyes lost in a daze, until a certain voice broke out of it. Kira? Kira's brows furrowed slightly. It was that annoying voice. Kira. I heard you the first time. Kira tore her eyes away from the smoke, her gaze settling on Aoife. At a glance, she seemed normal, but the faint dark circles under her eyes were hard to miss. News of Julian's death had been kept a secret from most, but they knew. Aoife had been the first one to break it down to them. As the princess of the empire, she was naturally filled in on the information. She had been instructed to keep it to herself, but Aoife, true to her noisy personality, shared it with the others, insisting they tell no one. The news naturally came as a shock to everyone. However, the shock merely lasted for a few seconds before everyone dismissed the news. This hadn't been the first time Julian had disappeared or died. But he didn't disappear this time. His body was found without a heartbeat or breath. Still, that wasn't enough for them. Julian was a cockroach. He wasn't the type to die so randomly and abruptly. He couldn't die like that. But then, they all saw Leon. The one man who had never truly shown his emotions was finally showing signs of weakness, from his haggard face to the distant, lost look in his eyes. And that was when it truly hit them. Julian. He was really dead. Classes are about to start soon. Are you going to skip? Probably. Kira replied absent-mindedly, her attention drifting back to the smoke curling in the air. Honestly, the term was nearly over and finals were just around the corner. At this point, classes felt pointless. They were more self-review sessions than anything. Plus, she also knew how to study on her own now. She had learned from. Puff. Kira took another drag of her cigarette as Aoife stared at her with a worried look. She was just about to say something when a presence behind her made her pause. What are you two doing? It was Evelyn. Taking a look at her and seeing her pale face, Aoife knew it was mostly due to Leon. He had yet to leave his room following the news of Julian's death. He barely ate as well. Aoife took a deep breath while giving her a brief rundown on the situation. I was asking if Kira wanted to come to class. She doesn't want to. Oh, I see. Evelyn appeared to understand as her eyes lowered. Although she wasn't extremely close to Julian due to her aversion towards him in the past, she had recently gotten on better terms with him. News of his death did hit her, but it had yet to truly sink in. But more than anything, the one to have been hit the hardest was Leon. He had completely shut down, lost in a cycle of self-blame, muttering things like, "It's my fault. I caused this. If only I were better." Over and over again. Regardless of what she said, he wouldn't listen as he fell deeper and deeper into the cycle of self-blame. He had truly been hit the hardest by Julian's death. And surprisingly, so did Kalian and Caius. The two of them appeared to have also been affected by Julian's death. This took everyone by surprise, especially considering how their relationship was at the start. Since when did they become so close? A strange silence filled the room as the three girls stood lost in their thoughts. That was until, well, Aoife broke the silence as she dropped her books and notes on the nearby table and sat down. Since none of you are going to class, I guess I'll study here. Fuck that. Kira flicked the cigarette away. I'd rather be left to study on my own. One of the reasons why I'm not going to class is because then I wouldn't have to see your face. So it would make me happy if you just, Kira paused, doing a shooing motion with her hand. Aoife's face twitched. You do know this is a common room, right? I do. Then, doesn't really change how I feel? Kira cut Aoife off again as she sat up, brushing off her clothes. Crushing the cigarette under her foot, she moved toward Aoife, a clear scowl on her face. You so much as make a single noise and I'll kill you. Wha the hell? Aoife looked at Kira with an aggrieved look while mumbling things like, where's the respect? I'm a goddamn princess. Why are you speaking to me like this? Overhearing her mumbling, Kira stopped and Aoife's mouth quickly shut. Kira smirked then. Pussy. She then proceeded to sit down opposite her. Staring at their interactions, Evelyn blinked her eyes slowly. It wasn't that long since Julian died. Evelyn half expected the two of them to be more affected, but apart from the occasional moments of silence, they seemed to be faring well. As if noticing the strange expression on her face, Kira turned to look her way. What's wrong? No, it's... You think that I'm acting too normal after the news? Evelyn's mouth squeezed into an X. Her thoughts had been read perfectly. Kira chuckled when she saw that as she went on to grab a nearby book before opening it. Do you know what he told me before? Kira mumbled, her eyes moving towards the pages of the book. Both Aoife and Evelyn looked at her as she closed her eyes and recalled a certain conversation in the past. Life doesn't pause for us. It moves forward relentlessly. Just as we should. It's about honoring what was while making room for what could be. That's how someone grows. The two of them stared at Kira in silence as she continued. I didn't really understand the words at first, but now I do. Kira pursed her lips. There's a time and place for everything, but life doesn't wait for me or for anyone. I can't keep standing in the same spot, stuck in the past. I had just recently taken my first step away from the starting line, and I can't go back to where I was before. She had spent too much time on that line. It was only recently that she managed to move past that line. And it was all thanks to him. And it was also for that reason that she didn't fall back to where she was before. Because she had grown past that point. Bang. A sudden crashing sound startled everyone as all heads raised towards the stairs where a figure stumbled down. Leon. Evelyn and the others immediately grew startled as they saw him barely hanging onto the handrail. Just as they were about to move to him, they saw him raise his head, his eyes bloodshot. His lips quivered, his instincts kicking him. I can't be wrong. Chapter 6:12, Failure of a Night 2. The plan was relatively simple. While Aldrich distracted Delilah, I would take the chance to sneak into the academy mirror crack. Well, it sounds simple, but executing something like this is extremely difficult. Thankfully, it's not entirely impossible. But it'll all depend on him. Still, it was incredibly difficult. How easy could it be to move away from Delilah undetected? I was already glad that she didn't notice a thing, considering how close we were. It was a good thing that Noel wasn't just any regular person. I massaged my face. He completely changed the structure of my face. Though I had my doubts, it clearly worked to perfection with not even one of the most powerful people in the world noticing. I felt that it was a little bit of a pity, but I had a mission to accomplish. I couldn't let myself fall for any distractions. Thinking this far, I scratched the back of my head. But just as I did, I saw a pair of eyes immediately lock in my direction as my entire body stiffened. Slowly turning my head, our eyes met, and I suddenly felt like my entire body had been submerged into the deepest waters. I immediately grew alert. Why is she staring at me? Did she notice something? That shouldn't be possible, or is she now strong enough to detect something like this? All sorts of thoughts rambled in my mind at that moment as I struggled to maintain my composure. Her gaze felt suffocating, and I felt like I couldn't move at all. However, at the same time, staring at her, I felt nothing. I had sealed all the pain away, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. This seemed to reflect outwardly as eventually her eyes drifted away from me and onto Aldrich. Who are they? Finally, for the first time, she asked about us. I slowly turned my attention towards Noel, who looked completely unfazed by her question as he raised his brow. They're my retainers. I need them to accompany me so that no incidents occur. Incidents? Why would they? My son thought the same before he suddenly died. There's no guarantee that something won't happen. Even if you're here. After all. You were there, weren't you? Delilah's face didn't change upon hearing the words. However, staring at her, I could feel something about her change. She eventually closed her eyes and moved forward. I understand. Delilah didn't say anything more and just continued ahead. I traced her back with my eyes and the locks in my heart started to shake. For some reason, her back, it felt extremely small. I quietly pursed my lips and let out a breath, calming down the locks on my emotions before focusing them mostly on two specific emotions, leaving the others untouched. Leaving that aside, I held onto my arms while staring at Noel. Thinking about how he had previously referred to me as son, I started to feel shivers run down my body. Goosebumps. I was feeling goosebumps. No, more importantly, I forgot to ask him about how he ended up becoming Aldrich. Don't tell me he actually. My stomach twisted as I looked at my hands. If that's truly the case, doesn't it mean that I've possessed the body of my own nephew? I felt like throwing up. However, after a little bit of thought, I denied the possibility. I knew Noel well enough to know he wasn't the type of person to do something like that. There was more to the story that he didn't let out. Or at least, I hoped that was the case. Looking in Noel's direction with a complicated look, I could only follow from behind in silence. There were mainly two reasons why we were currently at the academy. First, it was to officially recognize Julian as dead and thus have him put off the year list, and secondly, it was to visit Linus. He was still unaware of the news. These were the two reasons for our visit on the surface. The real reason was already obvious, and as we made our way into the academy, Aldrich stopped and looked in my direction. I think this should be far enough. I'll go handle the paperwork. You go inform Linus that I'm currently at the academy. Tell him I'll be coming to visit him soon. Understood. I nodded quietly before glancing briefly in Delilah's direction. She didn't even spare me a glance as she looked at Aldrich. Then, staring at her one last time, I slowly turned away and headed towards the dorm buildings. Following me from behind were the other retainers. In that moment, the locks in my heart shattered and the pain returned. But even so, I didn't look back while marching ahead. I'll definitely make it up to her. I promise. At the same time, near the dorms. What did you say? The girls were staring at Leon with incredulous, almost worried expressions. Taking a look at his pale face and seeing how bloodshot his eyes were, it was hard to not be worried about him. This was especially after hearing his words. I can't. Leon tried to help himself up but struggled to do so. It was only after Evelyn helped him that Leon managed to compose himself. Leon, what is up with you? She had a worried expression as she looked at him. Not only was he entirely pale, but he also looked quite weak. When was the last time he had eaten something? Evelyn was just about to speak again when she suddenly saw Leon raise his head and stare in a certain direction. Every hair on his body rose as he let go of her and moved forward. He could feel it now more than ever. His instincts told him that he was here. Or at least, Leon hoped that'd be the case. However, at the same time, he didn't hold much hope. He had witnessed Julian's death firsthand. Leon knew that he was dead. And yet, for some reason, he still hoped. He hoped that the sensation he was feeling wasn't just his imagination. Over the past few days, he had been blaming himself for Julian's death. Not because he wasn't there to help him when it mattered the most, but because he knew that nothing would have changed had he been there. He was a failure of a knight, and that was what hurt him the most. The fact that he failed to do the one job he was supposed to do. And I've even managed to make so much progress. Why? How? How did this happen? Even now he didn't know who the culprit was. Nobody told him a thing. They all told him the same thing over and over again. Get better. There's no point in you knowing. That's not something you can handle. The way they looked at him was all the same. They all thought the same thing. That he was a failure of a knight. That he was worthless. And the thing that hurt him the most was the fact that he couldn't disagree. He really had failed as a knight. Over there. With quivering lips, Leon moved towards the door, heading out as the sun bathed his entire body in warmth. Evelyn and the others followed him from behind, their expression worried. However, Leon ignored them. Right now, he was just following his instincts. Although they weren't reliable, they tended to be accurate. And soon, his eyes fell on a certain group. They were headed their way. Leon's gaze fell on them and he recognized them immediately. They were those from the Ivinus household. Why would they? Wait, looking at the insignia, they must be from the Ivinus household? Why are they here? I heard that Julian had a brother. Could they be here for him? As Leon overheard the conversation behind him, his eyes locked onto a specific person. His gait was calm and so was his face. However, looking at him, he looked completely different than the Julian he knew. His face was a lot thinner and so was his skeletal structure. Thin, circular framed glasses rested on his nose, adding an almost scholarly air, but his eyes were the real difference. Sharp and unsettling, it almost felt like nothing could escape his eyes. Leon felt his entire body shiver at the sight of him. I've never seen this person before and I've been in the Ivinus household for very long. Could it be? Excuse me. Finally arriving before them, those of the Ivinus household came to a stop. They looked at the 4 cadets in front of them before the man Leon was looking at stepped forward, his gaze directed towards Aoife as he bent over slightly. It is an honor to meet you, princess. The others followed suit as Aoife raised her hand. There's no need for that. I'm not a princess in the academy. If that is your wish. The man brought himself up before staring in the direction of the dorms. I've heard that the second young master is here. Could you perhaps help us find his room? Oh, sure. Aoife immediately nodded, looking at Evelyn and Kira before moving towards the entrance of the door, followed by the 2 of them. Leon. The only one who didn't enter was Leon, who kept his gaze directed towards the man from the Ivinus household. The more he stared at him, the more he felt that something about him was off. But at the same time, he could tell that he wasn't wearing a disguise or hiding his features with some sort of illusion skill. Then, is there something wrong? Cocking his head, the man stared at Leon, a half-smile marring his features. Snapping his head, Leon gradually shook his head. No, I just don't recognize you. This is the first time that I've seen you. Who might you be? Me? The man smiled before shifting his attention to the dorm rooms. If you already know the answer, what's the point of asking? Eh? Leon blinked his eyes, his face changing. However, before he could say anything further, the man followed the girls into the dorm, his face displaying the same half-hearted smile. That was all he said, leaving Leon standing stunned. Eventually, Leon found himself mumbling. Is it? Chapter 6:13, Failure of a Knight 3. What's really going on? Is that really him? Leon's mind was a mess as he entered the common room to see him speaking with the other delegates of the Ivinus household. Looking at him, he felt different compared to Julian. From the way he carried himself and spoke. He felt sharper, more refined, and at the same time more vicious. He looked like a snake hiding his fangs, ready to strike at any given moment. Could that really be him? If I'm understanding things correctly, he should be here to relay the news to Linus about Julian's death. If it were Julian, why would he do something like that? Unless he had a different goal in mind. Linus doesn't seem to be here. Do you want to wait here? The girls were being quite polite with the guests from the Ivinus household. Even the normally crazy Kira was mild as she made her way towards her own seat and started studying. It's all right. We don't have the time to wait. And then, eventually, his gaze fell on Leon. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like it if he accompanied me to look for Linus. Me? Leon was surprised at first, but then soon nodded his head under the surprised looks of the girls. I'll do it. Wait, Leo, eh? It's all right, I've recovered enough. But... Evelyn looked at Leon with a worried expression, but after seeing his expression, she decided to let him be. All right, who am I to tell you what to do? She, of all people, understood how Leon currently felt. She had no reason to stop him. In fact, this was probably a good thing. Having stayed in his own room for the past couple of days, getting some fresh air would be good for him. In the meantime, the man looked towards the Ivinus vassals. You guys wait here in case Linus shows up. In the meantime, I'll go with him to see if we can find him around. This will save us some valuable time. Understood. The vassals were strangely obedient to this new man whom Leon found unfamiliar. This made him even more suspicious and made him want to figure things out even more. Something is definitely off about him. All right, let's go. Moving past Leon, the strange man headed out of the common room and out of the dormitory. Leon looked back behind him, staring at the vassals before heading out and following the man from behind. Stepping out of the building, he was met by the blinding glare of the sun. As he moved forward, he reached out toward the strange man. Wait. He called out, his breath a little heavy. With barely any food in his system and days of sleeplessness weighing on him, he struggled to keep up. The man finally stopped and looked in Leon's direction. What is it? No, Leon caught his breath before looking at him. The more he looked at him, the more foreign he looked, and yet his instincts told him that it was him. Collecting his breath, Leon asked. I didn't catch your name. What did you say your name was? Me? The man blinked his eyes for a moment before adjusting his glasses. Lazarus. You can call me that. Lazarus? Leon raised his brow. What sort of name was that? This didn't sound like a common name or anything he had ever heard before. Even in my home country, the name is rather uncommon. But that is irrelevant for now. Let's go find Linus. Lazarus turned around and headed deeper into the academy. Leon followed him from behind, his mind wandering over the situation and everything that didn't add up. He had been so absorbed in his own thoughts that he didn't realize they were going the wrong way. By the time he realized, they were not far from the academy mirror crack. Wait, why are we here? This is the completely wrong direction. Linus. Leon's words were abruptly cut off by Lazarus, who stared off in the distance. So not only do you have a stupid face, but you're in fact stupid? I'm not stupid. Leon almost instinctively answered before he stopped himself. Then, slowly processing his words, his eyes shot up. See, could you? I don't know what you're talking about, but I do need your help. Lazarus pointed towards the cube-like building in the distance. I've heard that Linus is inside the mirror dimension. I'm sure a cadet of your caliber can help me get in to find him. Can you do that? Leon didn't know how to answer. His mind was blank. There was no way that Linus was inside the mirror dimension. The mirror dimension was still closed for the first years following the recent events. By now, he'd have to be stupid not to realize that something was up. He was very clearly aware that Lazarus could very well be Julian in disguise. But how? How was that possible? He had seen him die before his eyes. There was simply, So, are you going to help me? Leon pursed his lips, staring at the man in front of him with a complicated expression. If it was really him, why was he being so vague about it? No, more importantly, why did he not reveal his identity and come back to the academy? Leon had so many questions he wanted to ask but held his tongue. If this was truly Julian, then he definitely had a reason to do what he was doing. He knew him well enough to know that he wasn't the type to do things randomly. And so, after taking a deep breath, he nodded his head. All right, I'll help you out. Maybe this once I'll be useful. Leon stepped forward and entered the distant building, offering a nod to the guard as Lazarus followed silently behind. Entering the building, he looked completely unfazed, as though he had been here many times before. This further heightened Leon's certainty of Lazarus's identity. The mirror crack at the academy was under heavy guard following recent events, with security tighter than ever. In fact, the structure had only been recently built in order to better safeguard the crack. Arriving before the crack, the two were immediately stopped. State your identities. Leon glanced at the guard before handing over his student ID. Leon Ellert? The guard's eyes widened in surprise the moment he saw the ID. Leon wasn't just any cadet, he was well known for his exceptional talent and more recently for being revealed as the Prince of the Verdant Empire. If it were him, then there was no problem letting him in. But there was an issue. Who is he? The guard turned his attention towards Lazarus. He's with me. He's one of the delegates from the Ivinus household. I can vouch for him, Leon said while looking back at Lazarus. If you say so. Nonetheless, we still have to do some registering before allowing him in. This is for safety precautions. Leon looked behind to see Lazarus step forward with a confident stride. He then extended his hand. By all means. All right. The guard pulled out a small device and pressed it against Lazarus's arm. As a bright red light washed over it, Leon leaned in, studying the device with care. This device wasn't just any regular device. It was a type of scanner linked to a vast database, an advanced piece of technology recently developed by the Empire. All cadets had been registered within it. Its primary function was to detect disguises during identity verification, ensuring that no one could mask their true identity. It could also recognize anyone who had registered before. And Julian, he had already been scanned once. Leon pressed his lips into a thin line as he watched Lazarus undergo the scan. Would it detect something? Would it recognize him? Would it? Check complete. You may enter. But it seemed like he had been overthinking. The check lasted a few seconds and the result came out blank. Yeah, there's no way he wouldn't think of something like this. The check wasn't exactly foolproof and there were ways around it. In the end, the two managed to enter the mirror crack without any problems, the air suddenly turning arid and dry as they stepped in. We're here. As they stepped into the familiar space, Leon glanced toward Lazarus, who had come to a halt, quietly surveying the safe zone. Then, with a faint, knowing smile, Lazarus turned his gaze to meet Leon's. Thank you for bringing me here. Oh yeah. Leon nodded, his lips dry. He was curious as to why he had been brought here. He wanted to ask him if he was truly him. He had a lot of questions he wanted to ask, and yet he couldn't find it in him to ask a single one. In the end, the only thing he could do was stare blankly as Lazarus stared in the direction of the outer walls of the safe zone. Eventually, his lips parted. I will be going on a long journey. Eh? Long journey? I don't know how long, but it's something that I have to do. I don't really have a choice. Leon could only listen in silence, his heart pressing. He could more or less tell what he was planning on doing. I will probably change a lot. By the time I come back, I might just be a completely different person. I'll have missed a lot of things. I didn't expect things to turn out this way, but in the end, this is what I must do. slowly turning his attention towards Leon, Lazarus. No, Julian smiled. In that moment, Leon was sure. The man standing before him was Julian. You know, even though you were useless, my death had nothing to do with you. It was something that had to happen. What does that? Julian stepped closer, pressing his hand against Leon's shoulder. You're a prince now. You can't be stuck thinking about failing your job as a knight. There are more important things that you need to think about. In fact, I'm almost happy that I'm not with you. Things will probably get extremely troublesome if I were to stick with you. Lazarus's expression winced. In that moment, he truly looked like Julian, and a small laugh escaped Leon's lips. They'll not be that bad. In fact, if anything, sticking with Julian was the surefire way to guarantee trouble. He was a trouble magnet. I know they won't. Julian patted Leon on the shoulder as he mumbled. Don't resist, okay? Leon closed his eyes and nodded. All right. He understood exactly what Julian was about to do. And just before it happened, Leon took a deep breath and mumbled. I'm being fired, aren't I? Julian's hand paused before a laugh escaped his lips. You know it. Do I get any severance pay? With whose money? Yours. Fuck off. Julian clicked his tongue and mumbled, by firing you, I'm essentially giving away a lot of money, so be grateful. A faint white glow manifested over Julian's ring the moment Leon closed his eyes, and in that moment, the memories of the events that had occurred in the previous hour faded from Leon's mind. The last thing Leon recalled before everything faded was a few soft words. Goodbye, you failure of a knight. And with that, Leon forgot about everything. Chapter 614, A Long Journey, 1. It seems like the ring has worked. I stood in silence, watching as Leon blinked slowly, his eyes distant and unfocused. But it wasn't long before they snapped back to clarity. Hey! What? He glanced around, bewilderment written all over his face. With a furrowed brow, he scratched his head, clearly trying to make sense of how he'd ended up here. I could only smile at his antics before turning my attention away from him and onto the distant walls of the safe zone. The hard part was now done. Although Leon was probably going to figure something out or at least get a clue, most of his memories had been erased. In the first place, I had revealed my identity to him so that he could help me get into the safe zone. I knew that the moment he figured something out, he'd help me out. He was just like that. But in the end, I still had to erase his memories. All right, I shouldn't waste any more time. I looked around me before moving into one of the tents and activating Lament of Lies. Now that the hard part was done, all I needed to do was sneak out of the safe zone. Most of the heavy security was at the entrance of the crack, and with that part cleared, I could freely move out into the depths of the mirror dimension. Swoosh! The tent ballooned as I moved out, my gaze sorting through my surroundings before heading towards the exit of the safe station. As I moved, a couple of guards passed by me, my presence completely undetected. How's the situation outside? It's calmed down a bit. There are still several monsters trying to make their way in, but it's calmed down significantly. Nice. I can't wait to get some rest. Tell me about it. Overhearing the conversation, I sighed in relief. If there were monsters outside, then things would become rather problematic for me. However, that didn't seem to be the case. Then I should be able to sneak out without any problem. The safe zone had been built to keep monsters out, not to stop anyone from leaving. As a result, moving out of the safe zone was relatively easy. All I had to do was navigate through the guards, trying to keep my breath as minimal as possible. Was it perhaps because I had gotten in touch with the source before, or just because I had gotten stronger in general, but my control over Lament of Lies had gotten considerably better? None of the guards were able to detect a single thing, and before I knew it, I had stepped out of the safe zone. I looked at my surroundings and saw a barren land. The ground was cracked, and all sorts of pits appeared all around, with even chunks of metal and armor sprawled on the ground. Looks like the situation was a lot worse than I originally anticipated. Just with a glance and seeing how much blood had dried up on the ground, I could see why the academy had no choice but to send everyone out. It's a good thing I'm leaving when it's all over. Looking behind me and staring at the walls of the safe zone, I sighed to myself before turning away and heading deeper into the mirror dimension. There were a lot of complicated thoughts swirling in my mind, and in this very moment I wanted to do nothing but forget about it. And as such, I ran. I ran and ran. I ran until my breath was gone. That was when I stopped. And as I looked up, my vision grew red as a faint rustling sound echoed in the air. Rustle. A blood-red leaf fell before me and I smiled. It's been a while. Yes, it has. Human. It was none other than Almighty, whom I had not seen since I had returned from the Kasha. Oh, you're here? I guess I wasn't the only one pleased to see Almighty again as a black figure manifested before me, staring in Almighty's direction. TCH. Eh? Since when could it do that? It's also been a while, kitten. What did you call me? Is that not what you are? Pebble raised both of its paws as it thought about hitting Almighty, but then stopped itself when it realized this wasn't the same Almighty. It could only kick the ground and click its tongue. Just wait until I get a body. It looked at me, its gaze sharp. I could tell from its gaze that it was still mad at me. It couldn't be helped. Pebble had also thought I had died back then. This was the first time I had seen Pebble since the incident. I'm sure Pebble will get over it soon enough. I shifted my attention towards Almighty. For this journey, it was important that it came with me. The destination that I needed to go to was quite far, and without Almighty, it would be impossible for me to reach the place anytime soon. It was also going to be extremely dangerous, and without the ability to see visions or the future, I was now more vulnerable than ever. As such, I called for Almighty. Let's go. I can't afford to waste any more time. I extended my hand forward, and moments later, thick roots began to emerge from the ground. They slithered upward, twisting and curling around the earth before creeping along my limbs, wrapping around me. Soon, my vision grew dark. Almighty began to move then. That was the moment I stopped being Julian. From this moment forward, I became Lazarus, a traveling merchant from afar. At the same time, Delilah's office. The papers have been signed. You will receive a posthumous degree. I'll take it. Aldrich reached forward to grab the degree Delilah passed over. With this, Julian had now graduated from Haven. A year earlier, but he had now graduated. I take it that I can leave now, right? Aldrich stared at the degree for a brief moment before putting it away. Delilah sat on the opposite end, staring at him with her deep black eyes before slowly nodding her head. You may. Aldrich didn't waste a single second and stood up. He merely spared Delilah a glance before turning around and heading out. Clank. A tense silence followed after his departure. Delilah sat in her seat, her gaze lost and unfocused. It was unknown what her thoughts were as she just remained sitting without moving a single muscle. But that was until her communication device suddenly vibrated. TRR. It was only then that she snapped out of it. Yes. She soon answered it. Chancellor, there's been a situation. A voice Delilah recognized rather quickly echoed from the communication device, prompting her to frown. A situation? Yes, there's been a situation. An unknown person we believe to be from the Ivinus household has entered the mirror crack. He was accompanied by one of the cadets, Leon Ellert, before he suddenly vanished. When we questioned the cadet about the situation, he looked completely stunned. He doesn't seem to remember a single thing. Delilah's frown deepened as she heard the conversation. Her first thoughts were on the possibility of Leon being controlled by a spirit user. Only such means would explain the situation. This was the most obvious answer. However, as her mind focused on the Ivinus household part, a little part of her prickled. Her lips soon parted. Bring the cadet to my office. Understood. Following her words, Leon was quickly brought into her office as he looked around with a lost expression. I don't really. Delilah raised her hand. It's fine. I don't blame you. I wasn't able to notice a thing either, so the fault partially lies with me. Indeed, if the one responsible was from the Ivinus household, then they had somehow managed to slip away from her detection. But even then, she didn't notice anyone strong enough to be able to control Leon like that. The strongest appeared to be at around tier 6. Even Viscount Ivinus wasn't very strong. He was just around tier 4 to tier 5. It almost made her surprised to see, considering how talented Julian had been. Delilah closed her eyes and beckoned Leon forward. Come. Though confused, Leon complied and took a step forward. He was just about to open his mouth to speak when Delilah's hand reached for his head and he instantly blanked. What Delilah was currently doing was simple. She was trying to see and detect if there were any traces of spirit magic within Leon's mind. This was so that she could determine how the situation had unfolded. But just as she tried to sense something, Delilah stopped and her brow shot up. Looking at Leon, her eyes turned a deeper black. Something about the situation felt off. She did not find a single trace of spirit magic. Leon had not been manipulated at all. Then, did he lie? Looking at Leon, Delilah didn't feel like his actions were fake. She was quite good at determining someone's thoughts through her observational skills, and she could tell he wasn't lying. Then, I'll look deeper. Delilah closed her eyes and sank deeper into Leon's mind. While others couldn't afford to do it due to the risks it brought to the one being checked, Delilah was no regular person. As such, she delved deeper into Leon's mind, trying to see what had brought his memory loss. Thankfully, it didn't take long for her to find the foreign power. Though it was extremely thin and stealthy, she managed to find it and her eyes narrowed. That was because she felt this power was strange. It didn't seem to be anything like spirit magic. In fact, in some ways, it almost felt familiar to her. Why? Why did it feel familiar? Delilah reached closer to the power. The closer she went, the more the familiarity grew, and it wasn't long before her expression changed. That's... Her body shook and she rapidly opened her eyes, shaking her head. That makes no sense. Leon still had his eyes closed while she retreated. He was probably going to remain like this for the next few minutes. And it was good that way. Because right now, Delilah didn't want to be seen. No, that's... She leaned against the table, her lips quivering. She couldn't make sense of what she had just felt. The reason why she was familiar with the power was because she herself had been the one to help him disguise the relic. She had felt it before when examining it. That was without a doubt the ring of nothingness. But how could that be? Only those acknowledged by it could use it. And in that sense, there was only one person in the world who could use it. Ha! Delilah's body shook, the cracks she had been trying to hide slowly starting to expand. Could it be?